Good afternoon. My name is Fred Nauer. I'm the Chief Flight Instructor for Thunderbird Aviation. We're going to be doing the maintenance seminar this afternoon with Paul Bloch, our Director of Maintenance. Let me flip the camera around here. And we'll start talking about winterizing airplanes. Here's Paul Bloch in his very own personal airplane.
Thanks, guys, for showing up on a nice, beautiful fall day, Saturday. Today, we're going to talk about just getting prepared for winter and some of the things we need to do or should do, or they're, again, preventative maintenance items, you know. Today we'll cover just kind of a broad area of a few things about winter operations. First thing that I think I'd like to talk about is, you know, the weather temps are getting colder. How does that affect engine starting, different parameters like that? What weight oil? Do I switch my oil? Boy, I only have 20 hours on my oil. Should I just leave that? Should I, you know, I have my summer weight oil in there, which is a little bit thicker viscosity. And, you know, there again, I'll go over what we have as far as the variety of oils. Pretty much the standard was straight weight oils for many years. Everybody had the straight weight oil, and you see the straight weight oil by just a single number. This one here, you'll see that it's a straight weight oil, the number 100, and then the plus means they have an engine additive. It's a Lycoming a lubricant that there were certain requirements on certain engines, the Cessnas and that had it was called the H2AD nomenclature on the O320. Probably should never have put AD in there because it did get an AD. And the AD was for the lifters. Lycoming thought, hey, you know what? Let's have Ford make us some rockers and some valve tappets, and we're going to try something different. Didn't work so good. I mean, they still work, but I mean, they had some issues of the cams wearing down on them. So Lycoming, you know, and the AD said you got to put this Lycoming snake oil or one that has the plus, which has the additive in there. But that's a straight weight. Straight weight 100 means basically that is a 50 viscosity oil, and that's the way it is all the time. And more so, the viscosity rating on it is, obviously it's a lot thicker at a colder viscosity, so it behaves actually thicker than that, but when it warms up, it'll be a 50 viscosity. Then we go over to Aeroshell's multi-viscosity. Now you got a 15 here, and then you got a dash 50. Okay, so basically what that is, and they got kind of crazy with the W in the middle there. That means it has the additive. So here, all their oils have a W on the front of it. So there's just a W100. Then you got a W15, but you got a W after the 15. That basically is the same thing as the plus. And then you have a dash number and then the 50. So what that is what we consider in our cars. We know if you ever look in the automotive, has gone to multi-viscosities a long time ago. Now they're almost going to a zero weight with a dash number because their tolerances are so tight. What this is saying is that 15 is performing when it's cold. They have a measurement of certain temperature range and how that oil performs, and it means it's thinner when it's cold, and as it warms up, it starts performing to a 50 weight oil. And they do that by this one. Let's see here. This is a semi-synthetic. What they're doing is, unlike you see, I don't think there's a full synthetic available yet for aircraft engines. Synthetics do not work well with leaded fuel products. So the semi-synthetics right now are what they're using, or some of them are non-synthetic. I believe the cross country here again, that's a 20 weight, at -50. And this one is non-synthetic. So what they're doing is they on a multi-viscosity, they blend different molecules of the oil together, and together they work together to get that average. When it's cold, it works good, and then when it's warm, and it's all that fancy testing on there. But when you see those two dash number after that weight, it's not a 20 weight strictly, but the -50 means it's a multi-vis when you see those two numbers together versus a straight weight, just having one number means that pretty much performs only. So I mean, it's really, really thick. And the idea of a straight weight oils, they always worked well, but people had, I mean, you wouldn't want to usually in the wintertime, a lot of times they'd go down to a straight 80, which would be kind of like a 40 weight oil when it was all warmed up and ready to go. The advantage is startup. A lot of people are going to the multi-vis because you want that oil pumping through. You know, you start your engine up and the oil's cold, and as that temperature comes up, you want it flowing through everything on that engine and give proper lubrication. So that's why you like the multi-vis. You know, the theory behind it is it has a better spreadability on startups, which there's a lot of wear in there. You know, on startups and getting that oil moving through all the journals and the bearings and everything. Yes, it has it in there, but you gotta remember everything kind of drains down and goes back into the sump. So as you're starting that, it has to go back up through the oil pump, through these galleys, and these are your main feeder top galleys right here. See these little bump outs here? That's where your oil pressure and most of that stuff goes, feeds the cam and the lifters in this area, goes through the push rod tubes, and from the push rod tubes running through there goes into to your rockers and keeps the rocker arms and the whole top of the cylinder lubricated. And then as you see this little fitting there, it drains back down into the sump. That's where it returns. So, you know, then again, you can see all the, you know, here's an oil cooler on this side, and where the passages are, you got return lines and feeder lines here go back into the engine. Plus also it's going through this adapter and into the oil filter for filtration. So, you know, when it's sluggish or when it's cold out, that oil is really sluggish. I mean, it's like molasses, especially at straight weights. And you figure flow through there, you notice your oil pressure is way high when it's cold. Well, that's because just like the you know, your finger over the garden hose, the pressure has all the equipment there has holding that garden hose pressure on there, but the liquid thickens up, so the pressure has to go up. And then as the liquid thins down, that pressure will come back down into normal operating ranges. So that's why we're really careful about warming it up and not going full power till we get some oil temp and the oil is actually thinned out a little bit. So question is, I've been running a straight weight in the summertime, 100 weight. What's going to happen as temperatures get colder? Well, it might take first of all, it's going to be a lot thicker on startup, so you're not getting as good of lubricating properties as you'd like. And then it's going to take longer for it to thin out enough where you're not going to be over pressuring your oil pressure gauge. You'll see it in there. It's like, oof. Why I start bringing it up to do my mag checks, and it's way up, almost hitting the red line. Well, yeah, now it's going to get worse as you go up to full power takeoff. So you have to sit there, wait, idle a lot longer. So the thing would be is some people run a multi-vis or go to a lower weight straight weight. The nice thing that I like about the multi-vises and why we use them around here is they have a larger range of temperature because of that low property of when it's cold out, that the viscosity is supposed to be a lower viscosity. They perform across a larger temperature range. That's the whole idea behind a multi-viscosity oil. And so that consideration, since we're using a multi-vis we don't have to think anything from that aspect of it. You're still going to see some differences. You're still going to see that your oil pressure is probably going to run up a little higher until the temps get up. But it's not as drastic as going to a straight weight oil. So the other aspect of that also is, as the temps get colder, the engine isn't going to need as much cooling to keep her in the parameters where you want it. You know, like I always say is I like to shoot for 180 on a temp on an engine oil temp. And when you start getting in cooler temps, the air's cooler, you're transmitting that and keeping the temperatures down. Well, now you might have to limit some of the airflow. And so that's the other consideration at this time. What do I do? In Minnesota here, the fall is usually kind of, as I call, bipolar. We got really cold days followed by, well, warmed up pretty nicely. So that is the tricky thing at the flight school. We have a lot of trouble with that because where and when do I start putting on my winterization plates? Like if, for instance, on a Piper like this, you're not supposed to run them above 50 degrees. On the Cessna, you're actually blocking off inlet onto the engine, and you're not supposed to run those above 20 degrees, 25 degrees. So it's kind of that's not as troublesome when it gets a lot colder because it will be that. The range on the Pipers is a little bit higher, but there again, 50 degrees day out there, and you have it fully blocked off. Might get a little warm, depending on the layout, especially the ones that have the cooler here. Some of them have them down on the firewall, and just the ambient temperature that the cooler is surrounded by isn't as hot as this one being right next to the cylinder and then getting its intake air off of that cylinder. The other ones, it'll be like a duct going there, and it's kind of going through, and like on the archers and the arrows, it's getting that cooler mounted on the firewall. Those tend to be not as sensitive to putting the blocking plates on there. You don't see them warming up as much. So just something to think about. Best thing to do is put your blocking plates off, have them in the back of your baggage area, where I keep mine at this time. The other aspect is, what if you go on a trip? We're cold up here in northern, in Minnesota. You go out, we're flying up north, and it gets really cool. You might want to have that on there to get your oil temperatures up, and depending on your cruising altitude. Now you just say, well, I'm going to go down a trip to, southern Illinois. Well, you start out the day here, and it's 20 degrees, and you're like, oh boy, how long you're going to be at that level of 20 degrees. As you start going that direction, it starts to warm up and gets above 50. Well, you're going to have that cooler plate off. So bring a screwdriver around, be able to remove and put on your cooler plate at this time of year. Don't just get familiar with it, because you can go in for an oil change, and we have customers say, hey, can you put our oil cooler plate on there or take it off? And a lot of times they go, oh boy, the engine was really getting hot, or it just wasn't warming up, and we're running it and it never got above 120 degrees. Well, that's not good. You want that engine oil temperature to be up. You want to bake the water and the impurities out of there. It's bad to have low oil temps. Bad to have super high oil temps too. But that magic number is, if you can get it up to 180 degrees, you're doing good. And you don't want it cooking way up to where oil boils. And that's see, most red lines are going to be 242 degrees, 240 degrees on the red line on there. You don't want it up that high. 220, it's a little warm. I like to see it between 180 and 200, but you're not going to do any damage to it. But you are going to break down the oil quicker running at higher temperatures. So you'll notice that it will not. You'll start using oil more, and you go, oh, wasn't that much? I'm at maybe 25 hours, and I usually do a 50-hour oil change, but I'm using all oil. And you look at it, and there's just something different. It starts breaking down at those higher temperatures sooner. It's made for high, those temperatures, but that operating temperature, try to keep it in the 180 to 200. That is a perfect range for these engines. That's what they like. And they're air cooled, and the oil is air cooled, so they're sensitive to temperature changes. It's not like your car with coolant as the cooler that moderates everything so nicely. It doesn't matter. It always seems to heat up, and that temperature gauge is right where you want it. Once it heats up, doesn't matter if it's summertime, wintertime. It just kind of has a spot. You go, yeah, it's in the same spot. So that's the thing. First thing, thinking about oil. You know what I always say? If you are concerned and you are using a straight weight and you want to go to, oil is relatively cheap. I mean, in the aspect of how much an engine is. And so I always defer to the thing. If you're questioning it, just do it. Change it out. It's not going to hurt, by changing it out. But it could cause some distress by not changing it. So you just have to play with it, make those decisions. I always default to, if I have a question, just do it. Put your winter oil in. And there again, I'm running a multi-viscosity oil. Right now, I'm using one without an additive because I just built this engine and I'm in the break-in stage. But I end up using an additive and a multi-vis oil. So, anyways, enough said on oil, but that's something to think about. The other aspect, as we're sitting here thinking about winter operations, are we want some cabin heat. So what's one thing, Fred, that is kind of scary by the fact that you're using cabin heat? Where's the cabin heat coming from?
They didn't tell me this was going to be a test.
Okay. Well, we'll go down here and we'll show you. Cabin heat is off the mufflers. And here's a set of mufflers, new mufflers I'm just putting on this because I didn't like my old ones. I gotta set them in with the cowling here. But heat shroud goes around the mufflers. Well, what's inside of the muffler? Exhaust. And more so than exhaust, that crazy little gas called CO, carbon monoxide, which is odorless, tasteless, and sneaks in on pilots. And if you ever get a chance, do you remember the name of the guy with the Mooney who landed? He goes around in his presentation. Do you remember his name? No. Google that. He landed over, I believe it was in the Fargo area. He had passed out. I've seen his presentation. I wish I could remember his name. In his airplane, and it was on autopilot, and he woke up in a farm field alive. In his Mooney, just right down in there. He had a bumper, a scrape, or maybe a broken rib or something, but he walked out of there. His biggest thing was exposure, trying to get somewhere to a farm field or a house. And he finally did. I think he got some frostbite, some issues, but he did live. His plane landed, but he's kind of going around. As the FAA said, we don't have any survivors that can explain this story, because mostly everybody's dead. And how that whole day he thought he was maybe getting a little sick, a little headache, and throughout the idea of his thing is his muffler is breaking down inside. He was getting carbon monoxide inside the cabin. So that's something that's not a bad idea, to really do that inspection on the mufflers, make sure they're in good shape. This is a shroud that goes around this style. This will go up here on top of this one, and then it will be surrounding that. And then up here, this will be the duct that brings the air into the muffler area. And then on this one comes down and goes underneath like this. And that will be where the air comes out and gets into the duct and goes into the cabin. via a tube like this. So 2 things, it's a good idea to look at that. Number 2, it's a good time to look at these scat tubes and go, oh, how are they? Look at this one. I think I'm going to replace it. It's got some holes in there. That's going to, have some warm air coming in, but it's going to be drafting in some cold air too. So it's not going to perform properly. So look at those scat tubes carefully. If once you see that your mufflers are looking in pretty good shape, if you have any questions, definitely go bring it to your mechanic and have them look at it. I mean, if you want to learn some of these things on your own, it's non-destructive. You can do it. If you want to check out to see if you have any leaks, throw your vacuum cleaner, hook your vacuum cleaner up to the end in the blowing portion, and just take a little soapy water and look at some of the areas. Now, obviously, there's going to be some leaks around clamps like this. That's not an issue. The only issue for that would be if you have too many holes in your scat tube that is in your engine compartment area, but you'll notice that a lot of these areas will leak a little bit. You'll see a little bit of a chalky substance. That is the sulfurs and the exhaust products coming out. But, that's just the slip joint, but that's not in the cabin heat box area. So, but if you had too much of this torn, that is kind of going through and next to the tube. So it could draft in there and you could get some readings. And to the readings, the little plastic cards, garbage. Flying at night, are you going to be able to see that disc change colors, Fred?
Nope.
Nope. So I highly suggest for people that are flying in winter operations where you're having the cabin heat on a lot, get a digital carbon monoxide detector. You'll notice that they'll beep at you and you'll see actually what you're getting in there. You'll be surprised. You'll see some numbers in there just from the sheer nature that there is some carbon monoxide just in this area that could go into a fresh air vent there. It's just, this is where it's all coming out, goes to the bottom of your airplane. There might be some numbers there, but you'll find what the parameters are. You're not going to see a 0 reading necessarily on the digital one. That's that, but as long as it's within limits, that'll beep at you. You're going to read it in the nighttime. If there's a problem, it will beep. It won't be, oh, I thought I just, ate something bad and I had a headache or whatever, and then there'll be no question because you're going to be seeing these values and you can address it right away. Because you got to remember, carbon monoxide inhalation. See, this guy was on like 3 legs of a flight, and one leg was kind of not so good. The other, he thought he felt better, and then the third one, I think, was the one where he passed out. And you got to remember, carbon monoxide goes in, attaches to the hemoglobin, and it doesn't readily go away. It attaches, so you cannot bring in oxygen until it gets released from the hemoglobin, and that's very tricky. People, you see where they've had carbon monoxide poisoning, they got to put them in a hyperbaric pressure chamber to get rid of and release that out of their blood. Their blood stops functioning carrying oxygen because that molecule attaches to the hemoglobin where the oxygen molecule would go to, and it just doesn't go away. It has to be released out of your blood, and so that's the big problem. This guy, when they found him, when he had severe, they didn't know right away. They started testing, and then somehow somebody thought about carbon monoxide poisoning, and we never thought of that. And they ran the test, and they go, ooh, and they put him in the hyperbaric chamber. And I don't know what the hyperbaric chamber does, but that's how they treat a lot of that carbon monoxide poisoning. So that's one of something to think about. Winter operations. It's serious. I mean, it's a silent killer. You don't know. All of a sudden, it's like, I'm feeling just a little off, or I'm just a little tired, and then, it's like, it's kind of like altitude sickness starting out because your oxygen O2 levels are going down because your blood can't carry the oxygen to the vital parts of your body. So, Anyway, so think about that. And then just in general, it's not a bad time to take a look at your scat tubes. They're providing the heat in there. Make sure they're in good shape, you know, replace them. They got little spots in there, get rid of that and put a new piece on there. So that pretty much covers my thing that I wanted to talk about as far as carbon monoxide and the heating portion of things. The other aspect of it is not a bad thing to think about. And Fred, you can stay there. I'm just going to grab the tire. Start taking a look at your landing gear. Not a bad time to think, well, winter out and I'm have a flat tire or something, or you know, my tire pops because I didn't really look at it that carefully. You can see this one's worn pretty badly. You might not catch it right away. Look at how a lot of times this is a nose tire. A lot of times they wear a little bit unevenly because of you know, the turning tendencies when people are landing. You know, they're a little bit off to the side a little bit. They're not quite straight with their nose. If you were to catch it from this side, it looks pretty good. That side's got a hole almost right through. It's down to the cording. So, and the thing is, as temperatures get colder, having a flat tire out there is not fun because, you know, hopefully they have a nice FBO or a warm place to go, but some places don't. And that's another thing I always think about, kind of plan where you're going to land. A lot of times pilots mark their landing spots to the cheapest fuel. Well, it's not a bad gig, but what are their facilities? Generally speaking, cheapest fuel means no facilities on field, no places. They might not even have a decent AD building for you know, possibly going to the bathroom. You never know, or and warming up. So kind of plan that and then figure out, you know, I'm going to be out here with a pop tire and how am I going to stay warm, you know? So think these things through. I always say, you know, don't plan your trip on one criteria. Well, I go over there because I can get gas for $3.89 a gallon versus, you know, something else. And I said, yeah, but when you land, it'll fill up. You have a problem. Now, summertime not as a big deal, but wintertime, it's going to be very uncomfortable, and you're going to be calling somebody on a cell phone saying, "I need some help." But think about it. Look carefully at things because, you know, this one there, if I was just looking at it from one side, boy, that tire looks pretty good until you get to the spotted cord that thing is about ready to pop through the, you know. So, anyways, look at that. Number two on tires and wheels are wheel pants. And this on the wheel pants is it's harder to inspect things. So, Fred, I think I got that side, this side jacked up. I'm gonna, since you're down there already, I'm just gonna come over to people on that side. Two things. You got pre-flighting, obviously, where you're looking at stuff. And here's the other thing. I mean, you know, when you're pre-flighting, not a bad idea to roll your tires a little bit to see that all the cording and you haven't flat spotted through the cords. Obviously, check your tire pressures. And that's the other thing that with wheel pants, it gets a little bit more difficult. What is not a bad idea to do is when you're looking for that stem in the little door where you can get to it, take a little indelible pen, like one of those Sharpies, the paint stick Sharpies, and mark the tire, sidewall of the tire with a line. And so you know when that line is where you put it, your stem's going to be where you can check it. So it gives you kind of just makes it a little bit more convenient, and then you can check your tire pressures. The other aspect is it's not a bad idea to have a little mirror in your pre-flight kit. No, not that, not want that. So you can get in there and you can look around. You can see with a light up there. You can take a look in your mirror. You can say, oh, I can see the brakes. I can see the brake pads and different things, and just look up in areas that you can't see because you got a wheel pant on. not a bad idea to do that. The other aspect of it is in this fall time, we're going to be getting to the point where you're going to have, what do we call it? The wet cement, slushy snow stuff, where you get it, it snows, and then you go out flying somewhere, and it's kind of, it's melty and slushy and good snowball making stuff. Well, I've seen this before. I've repaired them before. People go in and they landed, and it was kind of they're taxiing, and it's a little slushy, and it went up there, put their airplane away, and now a cold front came through, and it got really cold, and it froze. And they went out there, and they go, "Oh, I heard this really funny sound when I took off." Well, first of all, it was kind of a scraping, kind of, I just took off anyways. And I heard this clunk, and it came back, and some of that slush was up there in the wheel pant, and then it got caught around there, and it just boom, and it knocked a good crack in a hole in the wheel pant that we had to, because it let loose and caused some problems. The other aspect is same thing happens with we've seen it here how many times, Fred, and because we keep our planes out, have we seen this? And I'm going to show you spinners. Okay, so you got a spinner, you got, depending on how many blades you have, it's got a couple of holes coming out of there. Some of them have 3 holes coming out, some have 4 or 5, depending on how many blades you have. All right, so what you notice is there's a gap. What if you had your prop sitting like this, and compression's here. Had your prop sitting like this, and you're out there on the ramp, and the front comes through. It starts out as rain, drizzly rain. Then it turns to snow, slushy snow, and then overnight it gets really cold, and then it clears out, and it's really Arctic-y, clear day, and it's about 20 degrees out. That rain that came in there and the slushy snow can get inside your spinner and freeze, and now it's clunking around in there. And we've seen it where actually blast out parts of the spinners where it's flying in there, and like, wow, that was a weird sound. All of a sudden, clunk, 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 clunk. And some of our, like the constant speed ones, have a little bit more of a cutout there, and then they have a little, usually a smaller cover plate over there. And we've actually lost those cover plates from the ice breaking them, coming out, and they come back in. They're like, I don't know, we heard a funny sound, and then, when we're flying along, it didn't seem too bad, on our run up and everything. But then, boy, it kind of scared us. But then it went away, and we come out there, go, big hole in there where that chunk of ice went flying out. So something to think about. If you're somewhere outside, you're in your prop, it's gonna be a lot harder for that moisture to get in there and stay in there. Still could if you had a driving rain, but I mean, that's another thing. I mean, if you can get in there with a mirror and a flashlight, just take a look, and just think about these things, because they can cause some problems and some cost. I mean, you start damaging a spinner, that's expensive stuff. Not to mention, hopefully you catch it. If that ice is in there and it's kind of, you'll notice kind of lots of weird vibration. You're going to think something's going on with your airplane. So these are things that we don't think about. It starts out as a liquid that we never worry about, and now it turns into a solid substance that we care about. Same thing on our wings. It's visible moisture in the air, and it gets cold out. What happens? We start building up ice. But this one is kind of that slow thing we never think about it. Well, it was raining last night, but then it got really cold, and it turned to this little bit of slushy snow, and then this morning it's like really bad. So other thing I want to talk about that is very important. It happens to us maybe 3 times a season, 2 or 3 times a season. Here's my stuff here. And it happened last year. It happened 2 or 3 times, and it just happened to be that there was several instances. I had a friend on the field here who calls me up in International Falls, And he goes, I don't know what happened. I started getting oil on my windshield, and it was a mess. I don't know what happened. And here's what happens. You look at back of the engine. Sometimes they might come off the front, work their way back. You see this big tube. Now this one's got some insulation on it. It actually has an actual little hole up here. They call it a whistle hole, whistle stop hole. That's because it's warmer up in this area. And just in case it freezes down here where it's exiting, hopefully it'll be able to blow out some of that it's called your crankcase breather tube. And if that blocks, you're going to start getting oil. You could blow out your seal up front. Every little orifice on your engine is going to start blowing oil out, and you're going to have a problem. And you could lose quite a bit of oil. And if not, you're going to have that front seal on the crankshaft popping out, and then there's oil coming up on your windshield, and it gets very ugly quickly, and it can be very hazardous. So, what I always say on pre-flight. Now, this is something that my friend didn't think about. He goes, well, yeah, all that moisture out of your engine comes out, and you'll see it in the wintertime when you park outside. You'll sometimes see like kind of a sludgy, brownish, icy stalagmite right underneath your breather tube, kind of sitting on the ramp there. Well, that's because all that moisture that was being taken in from the air in your engine and the oil is going to come out your breather tube. Well, as that's dripping down there and making the stalagmite, it could be making a stalactite up inside your breather. So take your pen, go up there, probe around. Just say, hey, oh, yep, that's free. I mean, at least something to go up there and make sure that that's clear. You can visually look at it, but you need to have that. You need to have that open to free air. You can't have that all iced up. And there's going to be moisture. Gooey, moistury, sludgy stuff because and a little oil comes out of that too. But that's your breather tube, but that moisture will freeze, and when it blocks this hole up. Now there is most installations. There's an AD on the Cessnas that said you have to have a oil hole. I don't know on the Pipers. It's probably a service instruction. Some of the Cessnas it's an AD, but that'll help. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to help it completely. It's still not the same as having a free open breather tube. So that's something to check out wintertime. Summertime we don't worry about it. It's not freezing. But I mean, that's something pre-flight, check it. Because like I said, my friend, he lost, oil was spraying on there and he started getting concerned. His oil pressure was still good, but he says it wasn't right. And he made an emergency landing in a field, not in a field, but at another field that he wasn't planning on landing to, coming back from International Falls. And he calls me up and he says, I got oil everywhere, all over my engine. And what am I going to do? And I said, check your breather. Oh, okay. And sure enough, his breather was plugged with ice. And now the thing is, what do? Now you're out there and it's like, okay, you figured that out, but you got oil everywhere. You're going to have to clean off your engine. You have to see, did it damage the oil seal? Is it going to continue to leak out? Now you're stuck out somewhere. So plan ahead. Think about that through. So, all right. So that's that. And then I think lastly, no, not necessarily lastly, I got one other thing to think about. Engine preheating systems. There's I believe both of them are Minnesota companies. You got Tanis and you have Reef. Both of them are good products, but they are probably the foremost on engine preheat systems. And they'll have a different way to heat up the cylinders, and there'll be a pad also on the oil sump that will warm it up. So some people are like, well, do I leave it plugged in all the time? We do here because we fly a lot. I know some of the flying clubs will leave them plugged in because they fly a lot. And how long do you need to have it plugged in? Well, you'll just have to see how long it takes. Some people have gotten some of my customers have gotten sophisticated enough that they have a little remote switch that'll turn their preheat system on the night before. They'll just have to dial up a number or push a button somewhere on the phone, on their cell phone, click, it'll hit that switch, turn power on to it, heat it up. There's a lot of theories on leaving it plugged in all the time versus not leaving it plugged in. But the bottom line is it's good to preheat. However you do it, you can have external preheating, which you can take a look at some of those kits, which are like basically blowing air tubes from a propane, heating element, but yes, it's good. I always think I like to have my engine up to 40 degrees startup, above freezing. It's a lot easier on it. It's the oil warmer quicker. Startup's easier on it.
So speaking of heaters, Dave has a question. He has a Tannis heater. Can he keep using the W80 on his Mooney year round? He's using the heater.
Well, if his oil temp, does he have a JPI on it?
It's just in the chat here. So
okay, ask him. Well, first of all, the W80, sometimes, you look at that, that is a 40 weight oil. So it isn't as bad as like the 100 as far as the thickness. The main thing is, what temperature is the oil at? Is there a rate? If he has a way of checking that temperature, then it's probably not a bad idea. It'd probably be just fine. I know Club Cherokee has JPIs on there and have their Tannis heaters on there. And when we go pull an airplane, do an oil change for them, and it comes across the field here, and I turn on their JPI, it's already sitting at a 50, 60 degrees, the oil already. So that's not bad. That engine is already warm from that. So at that point, it would be like, engine doesn't know that it's a lot colder than that out there. It thinks that the oil and everything is at 50, 60 degrees inside that compartment.
Yeah, he has a JPI 900.
Yeah, so he could just look, see what your oil temp is. If your oil temp always stays at a nice temperature starting out, then yeah, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. You won't have to worry so much about that thicker oil viscosity problems. There again, yeah, my hangar's heated. My airplane doesn't know. However, problem is, how is the situations when you're off someplace really cold with the blanket, and are you going to get a plug in? What you're off field somewhere to another place? Are you going to have problems getting something going because your oil's all gummed up because you weren't able to plug in, you weren't able to keep things warm, you weren't able to get a decent preheat? So those are always something to think about, and why a lot of people will just kind of go, well, I'm going to go to a multi-vis just from that aspect of it, because I don't know what's going to happen outside my base. If you're always coming back to your base and everything's controlled, then you might just be fine. So, but yeah, that's something to think about. Those are always good questions. Think about your usage. I'm not giving you guys, this is the way it's got to be. What I want you to do is think about what your mission is. Think about how you fly. Think about what you do. And think about some of these things in that mission. Kind of think it through. It's like a pre-flight planning. But this one is pre-flight maintenance planning, where you're thinking, how is my airplane going to be? What is my situation here? What am I, so it's a little bit more than just the clouds and the weather. It's the machine, thinking it back that way. So it's kind of like what Fred teaches all the time, for flight, clouds, and weather, and all this stuff, and what your weather flying ops. What is your? I'm trying to bring it back a little bit to the weather maintenance ops. So you gotta think about what that mission is, and everybody's mission is a little bit different. It might not all be the same. I'm just showing you guys some of the things that I've run into. We run into a lot of stuff around here, don't we, Fred?
Yes, we do.
We do. We run into, it's like you always think, never thought of that one. It's like, and Fred writes it in there. Well, let's do this as a procedure because I never thought about somebody doing that, So, and like I said, I've seen a lot of crazy things, from ice jamming up people's wheels to blowing out a spinner to, So anyway, so that's something to think about. So Tannis preheating, great. Reef, whatever you use. That's really good. You know, read up and see what you think about keeping them plugged in all the time. I look at that's the another aspect we'll get into. You don't fly much in winter. What do you do? What do you do as far as flyable? Do we want to leave it in flyable storage? Do you want to preserve the engine because you're not going to fly it all in winter? Don't just go out every week and run it up. There's nothing in any of the manufacturers' publications. They don't want you, well, I went out to the airport and ran my engine up for 30 minutes. No, they would rather you leave the engine sitting than doing that. You can't get it up to proper operating temperatures, and all of them will talk against it. There's many service letters and service instructions saying, don't do that. Go out there and fly it. If you're not going to fly it, leave it in a storage situation, and preserve it, or do whatever you're going to do. So the other aspect of it is, do I leave it in a non-heated hangar with a Tanis heater with a cowling blanket on there? I know a lot of people who do that all the time. It's always warm, Now you open up that cowling and it's kind of like you feel a lot of moisture and heat in there because you got a cold area that can't hold moisture, and all of a sudden you're in an area that heats up. Now your engine can your firewall area can hold more moisture because it's warmer air. Temperature and dew point. Cold air doesn't hold the same amount of moisture. It can't. Warm air can hold more moisture. Dew point can go up. So there's a lot of theories on that. Now, if other things that people talk about is using some type of a desiccant dryer, which is, they hook up something to that breather stack on the back, and then onto their oil filter or oil filler cap, and then it's got these desiccant discs and fill elements that dry the engine out after flying, keep the moisture out of that engine compartment. Because without moisture, you can't have rust. And you got steel parts in there, such as cams and lifters, that could pick up, could rust and corrode and start pitting, and then you end up losing a cam. So there's a lot of things that people can do, and I have customers who have built a desiccant system, and they swear by it. It works great. I have people that just leave it plugged in a cold hangar. I've never had a cam go out on mine. Mine's in a heated hangar. I keep bare minimum 40, 45 degrees, never gets below that, and sometimes warm in there if I'm hanging out there. And I've never had a problem. Doesn't mean you could. It's just the fact that in some regards, if moisture is in frozen state, it can't rust. So that's kind of the theory. As you have moisture and you warm it up and it becomes into the air because you warm the air up, that's when things can start to rust. So there's a lot of different opinions, a lot of different theories on it. Main thing is look at that aspect of it. What you're going to do as far as how often you're going to fly. Don't come out to the airport, run your airplane up, fly it. If you're not going to fly it, don't start it. Plain and simple. Nothing in the manufacturer's literature that says that's a good idea. I know it's a big theory, and a lot of mechanics will say, yes, that's what you should do. I don't agree with it. I go by the manufacturers who built the engines, and all of them say, no, don't. Cold weather operations don't do that. So, but something to think about. If you want to build yourself a desiccant system, it's great. I mean, you can do it pretty cheaply. You can buy them, they're expensive. And then back to the preheat. Do you want to do forced air preheat? You can buy those systems. You could probably come up with one, make one yourself, or have a nice plug-in heater system. Other aspect of it that people always neglect, and it's really nice, Tanis does this, and that is they make a heater block for inside the cabin. Now, a lot of our panels are getting more sophisticated and they're digital, so it's not quite as crucial. But you got an old airplane like mine has a lot of steam gauges, a lot of gyros in there. They don't like cold weather operations. You turn on the power, you hear that electric turn coordinator gyro spinning up, and it doesn't sound good in the wintertime. Some of your attitude indicators and the directional gyros, that you get the engine running when it's cold, and they're just kind of, what's that sound? Take your headphones off. It's like, ooh. Things they're kind of dancing around as the gyros are going. And it's like, so one nice thing is there are they do have heater blocks that are really safe, and they plug in with the same Tanis heater. You can set them in there, keep them in your baggage area, set them up on the floor away from it, but it keeps your cabin heated. I know some people just use your typical heater that you have that you can get over at Home Depot. Just be careful. It wasn't designed to be placed in a tight order like that. So don't burn up your airplane, come back and create a fire. Just think that through. If you're gonna, do something, make sure it has a tipping function where if it tips over, it's not gonna hit your carpet and keep melting the carpet and burn your plane up. I've heard of people using, I use an incandescent light bulb and plug that in there. I'm like, yeah, that's a heating element, but you've seen some of those incandescent bulbs get pretty hot, and you've seen that little cage come off of them, and they melt stuff pretty good. So just be safe at whatever you do, but it's not a bad idea to heat that up. Then the other thing Tanis makes is a wrap for your battery. We're going to talk about batteries because batteries don't like freezing. But they will freeze if they're at a discharge. That electrolyte in this one still has electrolyte. It is a recumbent gas. It's in what they call, like you've seen in the car, the alpha glass mat, where it's in this material, more like a fiberglass mat where it does its stuff, versus where you actually see the fluid floating around in one like this, which is a serviceable flooded cell battery. But they still freeze. You'll see them when they freeze, they expand and they look very bloated looking, and they never go back again. These will do the same thing. And the idea is when your electrolyte loses the ionic charge, specific gravity goes down. High specific gravity, when it's right where it's supposed to be, that's how you know that you have a proper charge in your battery. And you can tell that you don't necessarily, they'll have the specific gravities of your electrolyte versus the voltage that you're going to see off a battery. The main thing is you can test this by saying, hey, I am, my battery's at a discharge. A good charge on a battery, on a 12-volt battery, is going to be somewhere around 12.8, over 12.5. Now, even if you see that voltage, it doesn't mean they haven't lost their capacity. When they drop down, there's a capacity test also on there, and we find that out. The reason they usually do lose their capacity is someone's gone out, they didn't have a charger on their battery, and by nature, batteries will drain down with internal resistance. And then also there are a few items on airplanes that are hooked up not to the battery master. They're hooked up to like clocks and certain memory things on a lot of electronics. So there's always a little bit of a current drain that's directly off the battery. You'll see that usually by the battery posts or by the master solenoid that's usually by the battery box close to it. You'll see a few inline fuses right there hooked up to the hot side. And that is because you want current on those all the time. So they're hooked up and they're fused, not off of the bus bar. So there is always a little bit of a current draw off of these. And so you're not flying as much, the weather isn't as good. So what do? One idea is you pull the battery and bring it home with you and keep it in a warm spot in your basement or whatever. How are we doing that time?
5 minutes.
5 minutes. We'll wrap it up here. So you can pull your battery. That's not a tough thing to do depending on where it's located. Bring it back and then bring it out to the field with you. And at home, you could throw it on a charger. The other thing is you could put a trickle charger on there. You gotta be careful. These batteries are expensive. You go to Home Depot or Menards and get, a battery tender that's just meant for your car battery. They don't sense as well, and devalue. I mean, the battery companies will not count a warranty if they know you had a cheap battery man tender on there. Some people say, I've been using that for years and it's good. You know, the actually approved ones for these are not horrendously expensive. And they do a better job of cycling through and looking at the battery. There's something I don't know how it does it, but it senses what's going on in the battery. There's kind of a third step to it. And it's not a bad idea having those. The other thing is keep them warm. There are a lot of times in a very, they never really get warm. I mean, they're in an area in the airframe that's not going to see any heat when it ever warms up. And also they make blankets for them. Tanis makes them where you can plug it in and it keeps it warm when you have your Tanis heater plugged in. So you got a warm battery for start. Warm battery for start usually means it's a better start, And the last thing on that, go out there and you can't get your power turns on, but not enough capacity. What do? Jump it. Well, yes, you can do that. The main thing is every time you do that, that battery is at a big discharge. They'll have a parameter in there on my fancy charger that says, when at a severe discharge, this is how many amps go into it. What happens when your airplane starts and your alternator kicks on? You're going to be charging at 50, 60 amps. It's going into that battery and just cooking it. And what happens is when they cook, they will outgas and, this one will vent out here and there's a tube going in. These guys, it still does damage to them. They're valve regulated. They'll have to outgas if they're not going to blow up. But all that juice going into a very discharge creates a lot of heat and a lot of problems. So you can do damage to your battery. You do it once and go, oh, it wasn't so bad. You do it a couple of times, you come back there, now your battery has no capacity. You go, well, it was kind of low and I jumped my airplane and got it going. Yeah, but now you just cook that battery charging it. It would be like me going to the start mode on this battery charger and putting in 75 amps into it. You just watch that thing percolating on your bench. You set that on your bench and you see it and come back like just kind of smoking and steaming and percolating. Well, that's what you're doing by going directly from your alternator charging it up. It's not going to say, oh, I'm going to be kind to it. It's going to give the juice that it can give. So anyways, any questions?
Not that I can see.
Okay. Well, guys, thanks for showing up. Hopefully you got something to think about. Got some things. Hopefully you learned something. If not, just disregard and throw that as a bunch of useless information. I don't. But I mean, I'm just trying to get people to think things through more on the side. We always think of flight ops. Let's think about machinery ops, so to speak. So anyways, well, thanks for spending time with me for this last hour. Thank you, Fred, for filming.
No problem.
Fred's my good filmer. So, and we will see you at the next seminar, which I don't know what it is, but Fred and I will talk it over. We'll come up with something. So.